"Can you pretend to be my cook for 1 week?" said the lonely cowboy to the native woman. The sun had just begun to rise over the wide, endless prairie, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange. A gentle breeze rustled the dry grass, and somewhere in the distance a lone horse whinnied as if calling to the quiet morning. In the middle of this vast land, a small wooden cabin stood alone, surrounded by nothing but open fields and the occasional cluster of trees. This was the home of a cowboy named Samuel. He had lived here for many years, far away from the noise of the towns and cities, choosing the quiet life of the prairie. He knew the land like the back of his hand, understanding the rhythm of the seasons, the habits of the animals, and the harshness of isolation. He could ride horses with skill, mend fences, herd cattle, and survive the challenges of the wild, but there was one part of life he struggled with, taking care of himself, especially when it came to food. Samuel was a man of simple needs. He did not want fancy meals or expensive ingredients. He liked meat, bread, and whatever vegetables he could grow or trade for in the nearest town, but he had never learned to cook properly. Most of the time he ate whatever was easy. Beans from a tin, bread that had gone slightly stale, or whatever he could grill over a small fire. Sometimes he would catch a fish or cook a piece of meat, but even then he would burn it or undercook it, leaving him frustrated. He often thought about how lonely it felt to eat alone, staring at his small wooden table while the wind howled outside. There was no one to share stories with, no one to laugh at a small mistake, no one to appreciate even a simple meal. On this particular morning, Samuel was feeling especially lonely. He had woken up early, as always, to feed the horses and check the fences. He worked with care, moving around the barn and the open fields, feeling the cold breeze brush against his face. After finishing his chores, he returned to the cabin, hoping for a hot meal to warm him. But as he opened his small kitchen cupboard, he realized once again that he had nothing prepared. The small tins of food he had were empty, and the bread was hard as a rock. He sighed and leaned against the counter, running a hand over his face. "There has to be a better way," he muttered to himself. He had spent so many years surviving on simple cold meals, and he realized that life could be better if he could only share it with someone who knew how to cook. Samuel thought about the town nearby. It was small, with only a few shops and a handful of families who had lived there for generations. He knew many people in passing, but he had never been close to anyone. He remembered seeing a woman in town a few times. She was known for her cooking, and people often talked about how delicious her meals were. She was a native woman, quiet but strong, with a kind smile that seemed to light up the room when she helped others. Samuel had never spoken to her beyond a polite greeting, but now, sitting alone in his cabin, he thought of her with hope. Maybe she could help him. Maybe she could bring warmth into his lonely life, even if only for a short while. The thought seemed strange even to himself. How would he ask a stranger to cook for him? How would he explain that he was not used to asking for help, that he had lived alone for so long that asking for anything felt almost impossible? He paced around the cabin thinking carefully about the words he would say. He wanted to be honest, to show that he was not being lazy or demanding, but that he genuinely needed someone's help to make his life a little more bearable. He imagined her reaction. Would she laugh at him? Would she refuse? The uncertainty made him nervous, but he knew he had to try. After much thought, Samuel decided to go to the town and speak to her in person. He saddled his horse, checking the saddle and bridle carefully. He packed a small bag with a few essentials, not knowing how long he would stay in town, and rode slowly, taking in the beauty of the prairie as he went. The sun was higher now and the fields glowed golden, stretching endlessly in every direction. Samuel felt a strange mix of nervousness and hope. He had faced storms, wild animals, and long nights alone, but asking for help was a challenge of a different kind. It made him feel vulnerable, but he knew that sometimes vulnerability was the first step towards something good. When he arrived in the town, the streets were quiet. A few people moved about their morning tasks, but nothing seemed rushed or chaotic. He tied his horse outside a small general store and walked slowly, searching for the woman he had in mind. He saw her near the market, arranging fresh vegetables on a wooden stand. Her movements were careful and graceful, and she smiled at a small child who had come to look at the produce. Samuel waited for a moment, gathering his courage. Then he walked up to her and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "Excuse me, I wonder if I could ask you for a favor." The woman looked at him with curiosity, her dark eyes meeting his. Samuel continued, "I live alone out on the prairie. I know it may sound strange, but I need someone to cook for me, just for 1 week. I don't need anything fancy, just someone to help me eat properly so I don't spend another week with empty meals." He paused, unsure if he had said too much or if she would understand. The woman listened quietly, her expression thoughtful. Samuel could feel the tension in his chest, the hope and fear mixing together. After a moment, the woman spoke. She asked questions about the cabin, about what kind of food he liked, and about why he lived alone. Samuel answered honestly, telling her about the life he had chosen, the work he did on the prairie, and the loneliness that often followed him home. She nodded, and he could see that she was considering his request carefully. Finally, she said, "1 week I will come to your cabin and cook for you, but you must promise to respect my time and effort. I will not stay longer than that, and I expect you to treat this seriously." Samuel's heart lifted. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I promise. I will be grateful and respectful." The arrangements were made. Samuel rode back to his cabin with a sense of anticipation he had not felt in years. For the first time, he imagined what it would be like to have someone in the kitchen, to smell the aroma of fresh bread and cooked vegetables, to sit down at the table with another person and share a meal. He thought about the stories he could hear, the laughter that might fill the small cabin, and the warmth that would replace the cold silence he had grown used to. It was a small step, but to him it felt monumental. As the sun set over the prairie, casting long shadows across the fields, Samuel prepared his cabin for his guest. He cleaned the floors, dusted the furniture, and even tried to sweep up a little cobweb. He arranged a small table near the window so they could see the sunset while eating. He felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. What if he made a mistake? What if she did not like his home or the food he could provide? But he pushed these thoughts aside. He knew that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. That night, Samuel sat by the fire, thinking about the week ahead. He imagined the meals, the conversations, and the simple joys of having someone with him. For so long he had been alone, and now he realized that a small act, a week of shared meals, could change everything. He felt hope stirring in his heart, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the cabin. He knew that life could be unpredictable, that challenges and surprises awaited, but for the first time in a long time, he was ready to face them not alone, but with someone who might bring a little light into his quiet world. And so, the lonely cowboy waited for the morning, eager to welcome the native woman who would, for 1 week, become his cook, and perhaps, in ways he could not yet imagine, become the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The next morning, the cowboy Samuel woke before the sun. His small cabin felt different, quieter, and yet full of anticipation. Today was the day the native woman, whose name he had learned was Ayana, would arrive. He had been thinking about this moment since their conversation in town, wondering what it would be like to have someone cook for him, to share the space of his lonely home, even if only for a week. His heart beat faster than usual, a mixture of excitement and nervousness he had never felt before. Samuel went about his morning chores with more care than usual. He fed the horses, checked the fences, and cleaned the stable, making sure everything was in perfect order. He even tried to sweep the floors of his cabin again, noticing how dusty and worn everything had become over the years. He wanted Ayana to feel welcome, not only because he had asked for her help, but because he realized that having someone in his home deserved respect. He poured himself a cup of weak coffee and sat by the window, staring out at the endless prairie, imagining how life might change with her presence. By mid-morning, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, signaling the approach of a rider. Samuel felt his stomach tighten. Was he prepared enough? Would Ayana like his cabin? Would she even enjoy cooking here? The dust grew closer, and soon he could see a woman riding a small horse, her posture calm and confident. Her dark hair was tied back, and her eyes, sharp and observant, scanned the landscape as if she already understood the land she was approaching. Samuel's nerves eased slightly when she smiled in his direction. He went outside to meet her, wiping his hands on his worn trousers. "Ayana," he said, "thank you for coming. Please, come inside." She nodded politely, dismounting from her horse with ease. Her movements were graceful but firm, showing strength and experience. Samuel led her into the cabin, showing her the small kitchen, the modest space where she would prepare the meals. "It's simple," he said, "but it's clean, and I hope it's enough for you to work with." She noticed the worn floors, the small counter, the rusty stove, and even the few utensils scattered about. She did not comment immediately, but instead assessed the space quietly. Samuel watched her, feeling the weight of expectation, hoping that she could manage with the limitations of his cabin. Finally, she nodded. "This will do," she said simply. Her tone was neither harsh nor warm, just honest. Samuel felt a small wave of relief. The first hours were awkward. Samuel tried to help by carrying water from the well, chopping wood for the stove, and gathering the few vegetables he had stored in his small pantry. Ayana worked steadily, arranging her ingredients, cleaning them carefully, and moving with purpose around the tiny kitchen. Samuel realized quickly that cooking was an art he had never understood. Watching her, he saw that it was not just about mixing ingredients. It was about timing, patience, and care. He tried to ask questions, but Ayanna responded with quiet answers, showing him rather than explaining too much. As the day went on, the aroma of fresh bread and cooked vegetables began to fill the cabin. Samuel had never experienced such a smell in his home before, and it made his mouth water. He watched Ayanna work, noticing the small gestures she made, how she tasted the food, how she adjusted the seasoning, how she moved around the kitchen with ease. He realized that this was not just cooking. It was a way of caring, a way of showing respect for life and for those who would eat the food. He felt grateful and, for the first time in a long while, truly looked forward to a meal. When the first meal was ready, Ayanna set the table with simple care. Samuel noticed that even the small touches, the folded napkin, the small plate of fresh fruit, made the cabin feel warmer. They sat together and he took a deep breath before trying the food. The first bite surprised him. The flavors were rich, even with simple ingredients, and each bite seemed to tell a story. He could taste the care she had put into preparing it, and he felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove. As they ate, Samuel tried to make conversation, asking Ayanna about her life, her skills, and the stories behind the recipes. She spoke carefully, sharing small bits of her past and her family, but never in a way that felt forced. Samuel listened intently, fascinated by the history and experiences she shared. He learned that many of her recipes had been passed down through generations, each one holding a story, a memory, a lesson. Samuel realized that food was more than sustenance. It was culture, identity, and love expressed in a way that he had never understood fully before. The afternoon passed in a quiet rhythm. Samuel attempted to help, fetching ingredients or chopping vegetables, but Ayanna's movements were so practiced that he often found himself in the way. She corrected him gently, showing him how to hold a knife or measure ingredients, and he appreciated the patience she offered. He began to see the day as more than just learning to eat better. It was a lesson in humility, in understanding skills he had never valued, and in appreciating the effort that went into something as simple as a meal. By evening, the cabin felt alive in a new way. The sun was low in the sky, casting a golden light through the window. Samuel and Ayanna sat together after cleaning up, sharing small stories about their days. Samuel spoke of life on the prairie, of the long hours with the horses, of the quiet nights when the wind seemed to be the only sound. Ayanna shared stories from her childhood, of learning to cook from her mother and grandmother, of the community in her village and the importance of gathering and sharing food. The conversation flowed naturally, breaking the barriers of distance and difference. For Samuel, this was a revelation. He had lived alone for so many years that he had forgotten what it felt like to connect with someone beyond polite greetings. He realized that meals could be a bridge between people, a way to share not just food, but stories, laughter, and life itself. Watching Ayanna work, listening to her speak, and enjoying the meals she prepared made him understand that even a week of shared cooking could change the texture of life, making it richer, warmer, and more meaningful.
Ayanna, too, began to see Samuel differently.
At first he had seemed awkward, isolated, almost stubborn in his routines. But as the day passed, she noticed his genuine interest in learning, his respect for her work, and the quiet kindness that ran through his actions. He asked questions not to challenge, but to understand. He offered help, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity and willingness. She realized that her time here, even if only for a week, could be meaningful for both of them. She began to feel a subtle connection, a sense that this week could be more than just cooking. It could be the start of understanding and friendship. As night fell, Samuel prepared a small fire in the hearth, and they sat together, sharing a cup of warm tea. The cabin, once silent and lonely, now held the quiet hum of companionship. Samuel thought about the days ahead, imagining the meals yet to come, the stories they would share, and the laughter that might fill the small space. He felt anticipation instead of loneliness, hope instead of emptiness. For the first time in years, he realized that asking for help had not made him weak. It had opened the door to something he had never expected. Connection, warmth, and perhaps even friendship. Ayanna cleaned her cooking tools and set them neatly for the next day. She did not speak much, but her calm presence spoke volumes. Samuel watched her work, realizing that her decision to come here was not just about cooking. It was about sharing a piece of herself, a piece of her culture, and a piece of her life. He felt gratitude swell in his chest, a deep respect for the woman who had agreed to step into his solitary world. He knew that the days ahead would be a learning experience, not only about food, but about life, companionship, and the small joys that often went unnoticed when one was alone. That night, as Samuel lay in bed, he thought about the day. He reflected on the smell of fresh bread, the taste of carefully prepared meals, the sound of laughter, and the comfort of simple conversation. He realized that even though Ayana had only been there for a short time, she had already made the cabin feel alive. He felt a quiet excitement for the days to come, knowing that this week would be different from anything he had experienced before. Perhaps it would even change him in ways he could not yet imagine. And so, as the stars began to shine over the prairie, Samuel fell asleep with a sense of hope. The week had only just begun, but already the presence of Ayana had brought warmth, learning, and a connection that he had long forgotten existed. He was no longer just a lonely cowboy. He was someone who had opened his life to another person, someone who could teach him, challenge him, and perhaps, in the simplest ways, make his heart feel full again. The following morning, Samuel woke to the sound of birds singing outside his cabin window. The prairie was alive with light, and a soft breeze carried the fresh scent of grass and earth. He stretched and looked around the cabin, which suddenly felt less empty than it had the day before. The presence of Ayana, the native woman who had agreed to cook for him for a week, had already brought a new energy to the place. Samuel felt a strange sense of excitement, as though the simple act of sharing his home and meals could transform not only his days but also his outlook on life. He dressed quickly and went outside to feed the horses, but his mind was already thinking about breakfast. He peeked into the cabin to see Ayana moving with calm efficiency. She had begun preparing dough for fresh bread while humming softly to herself. Samuel watched quietly, not wanting to disturb her rhythm. There was something comforting about seeing her work, the way her hands moved with confidence and care. He realized that cooking was more than just preparing food. It was a way of shaping the day, of bringing life and warmth into the smallest spaces. "Good morning," he said, trying to sound casual though his heart raced. Ayana looked up and smiled faintly. "Good morning," she replied. Her eyes sparkled with a quiet amusement, as if she noticed his nervous excitement. Samuel wondered how she could be so calm while he felt his chest tighten with anticipation. "I thought I might help today," he offered, though he knew that his skills in the kitchen were minimal at best. Ayana nodded. "You can help. There is always something to do. But you must listen carefully. Cooking is patience, not rushing," she said, her voice gentle but firm. Samuel rolled up his sleeves and tried to follow her instructions. She asked him to wash the vegetables, cut them into uniform pieces, and prepare the herbs. At first, his hands shook slightly and the pieces were uneven, but Ayana guided him with patience. "Slowly," she said. "Focus on each step. The food will thank you if you give it care." He realized that even this simple task required attention and respect. It was not just about feeding himself, it was about learning to care for something outside his own needs. Each movement, each cut, each sprinkle of seasoning felt like a lesson in mindfulness. By mid-morning, the cabin smelled of bread baking in the small stove, of vegetables sizzling gently in a pan, and of spices that Samuel had never used before. He watched as Ayana tasted each dish, adjusted the seasonings, and arranged everything on the table. The act of cooking, he realized, was a language she spoke fluently, one that conveyed love, tradition, and attention to detail. He felt a warmth spreading through him, not just from the food, but from the connection that was slowly forming between them. As they sat down to eat breakfast, Samuel noticed that the food tasted even better than he had imagined. The bread was soft and warm, the vegetables were tender and flavorful, and each bite seemed to carry a story. He asked her about the recipes, and Ayana shared a little about their origins. Some had been passed down from her mother and grandmother, others she had learned from elders in her community. She spoke of the importance of food in bringing people together, of how each meal carried history and culture, and of the joy in preparing it with care. Samuel listened intently, amazed at how something as simple as a meal could hold so much meaning. After breakfast, they cleaned the kitchen together. Samuel discovered that washing dishes and putting things away required more patience than he had expected. Ayana showed him small tricks for efficiency, but always emphasized respect for the work itself. "Every step matters," she said. "Even cleaning is part of a meal." Samuel realized that he had never thought of it that way before. To him, cleaning was a chore. To her, it was part of the experience, part of honoring the food and the effort it took to prepare it. The afternoon passed in a rhythm that Samuel found both peaceful and energizing. Ayana began preparing lunch, and he helped where he could, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, and learning how to measure ingredients properly. He was careful not to rush, remembering her words about patience. She moved gracefully around the kitchen, occasionally giving him advice or showing him a trick. He was surprised by how much he enjoyed the process. Cooking, he realized, was not just about filling the stomach. It was about focus, creativity, and sharing effort with another person. As they worked together, conversation flowed more freely than before. Samuel told stories about life on the prairie, about the long days with the cattle and the quiet nights under the stars. He spoke of the loneliness he often felt, the silence of the empty cabin, and the comfort he found in the routines of work. Ayanna listened carefully, occasionally asking questions to understand better. She shared stories of her childhood, of learning to cook from her mother, and of the community she had grown up in. Each story painted a picture of a life rich in tradition and connectedness, so different from Samuel's solitary world. By the time lunch was ready, the cabin was filled with the rich aromas of roasted meat, fresh vegetables, and warm bread. Samuel took a bite and was amazed at the flavors. Each element of the meal was carefully balanced, a combination of skill and intuition that he had never experienced. He realized that food could be a bridge between people, a way of understanding each other without words. Eating together, sharing these meals, made him feel less alone than he had in years. It was not just nourishment, it was companionship. After lunch, they sat by the window, watching the prairie stretch endlessly before them. Samuel felt a sense of calm he had not known in a long time. He realized that the week ahead was not simply about having someone cook for him. It was about learning to connect, to appreciate, and to share life with another person. Ayanna's presence had already changed the atmosphere of the cabin. It no longer felt lonely or cold. It felt warm, alive, and welcoming. As the afternoon moved toward evening, they began preparing dinner. Samuel felt more confident now, chopping and stirring under Ayanna's watchful eye. She showed him small techniques like how to layer flavors, how to time the cooking so everything was ready at the same moment, and how to clean as they went to make the process smoother. Samuel realized that he was learning far more than just cooking. He was learning patience, organization, and attention to detail. The experience was transforming the way he thought about daily life, about care, and about effort. When dinner was ready, they sat together once again, the sun casting a golden glow across the cabin. Samuel took a deep breath and tasted the food. The flavors were rich and comforting, and he felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond hunger. He realized that Ayanna's work had brought something new into his life. The joy of sharing, the warmth of connection, and the understanding that even simple meals could carry meaning and care. He looked at her and smiled, silently grateful for her presence, patience, and guidance. The evening ended with quiet conversation by the fire. Samuel and Ayanna spoke about small things, plans for the next day, ingredients they might use, and memories of past meals. There was a peaceful rhythm to their interaction, a balance of effort and relaxation that made Samuel feel at home in a way he had not for many years. He realized that the week ahead held not just the promise of good food, but also the chance to learn, grow, and perhaps form a lasting connection with someone who had brought warmth into his life. As night fell and the stars appeared over the prairie, Samuel reflected on the day. He had learned so much, not only about cooking, but about patience, respect, and the importance of shared experience. Ayanna's presence had turned a simple cabin into a place of learning, comfort, and companionship. He felt grateful for the opportunity, and he looked forward to the days to come, eager to continue this unexpected journey of connection, flavor, and understanding. In the quiet of his room, Samuel realized something important. Life on the prairie had been lonely not because of the work or the isolation itself, but because he had never fully opened himself to the presence and skills of others. Ayanna's arrival had already begun to change that. Even though the week was only beginning, he could feel the difference in his heart. There was excitement, curiosity, and a sense of hope that he had not experienced in many years. He fell asleep with a quiet smile, knowing that tomorrow would bring new lessons, new meals, and the continued opportunity to grow alongside someone who had entered his life not just as a cook, but as a teacher and companion. The following days passed in a gentle rhythm, each one teaching Samuel something new about life, patience. By now, Ayanna had settled comfortably into his cabin, moving through the small space as if it belonged to her too. Her presence brought a warmth that Samuel had long forgotten, a quiet energy that made the cabin feel alive. He found himself waking up earlier, eager to start the day, not just for the chores or the prairie work, but for the chance to see what new meals she would prepare, and to share the small joys that came with cooking together. Samuel was learning quickly, though not without mistakes. On the third morning, he attempted to knead dough for bread under Ayanna's supervision. His hands were clumsy at first, and the dough tore unevenly, sticking to his fingers in the table. He grew frustrated and muttered under his breath. Ayanna smiled gently, placing her hand over his and guiding him. "Slow down, Samuel. Feel the dough. Listen to it. Cooking is patience, not a race," she said softly. He followed her instructions carefully this time, noticing how each fold and press changed the dough's texture. When the bread finally went into the oven, he felt a quiet pride swell inside him. It was a small achievement, but to Samuel it felt monumental. As the week progressed, the meals became more elaborate. Ayanna introduced him to ingredients he had never used, like fresh herbs and grains, and techniques he had never tried, like slow roasting and layering flavors. She showed him how to make soups that were hearty and filling, how to roast vegetables to bring out their natural sweetness, and how to bake bread that smelled like comfort itself. Samuel marveled at how much care went into each dish. He had always thought cooking was simple, but he realized it was an art form, a way to express care, culture, and love. Beyond the food, the days became a time of shared stories and laughter. Samuel began to open up about his life on the prairie, telling Ayanna about long nights when he had felt alone, the challenges of tending cattle, and the endless monotony of a solitary existence. She listened intently, asking questions that helped him articulate experiences he had barely spoken about to anyone. In return, Ayanna shared stories of her childhood, her family, and the lessons she had learned from her community. Samuel discovered the depth and richness of her life, realizing that every meal carried a history, a story, and a connection to generations past. By the fourth day, Samuel noticed subtle changes in himself. He moved more confidently in the kitchen, anticipating what Ayanna would need before she asked. He learned to clean as he went, organize the workspace, and measure ingredients with care. Cooking together was no longer just about sustenance. It had become a dance of trust and cooperation. He also noticed how much he looked forward to their shared meals, not only for the food, but for the conversations, the laughter, and the quiet moments that made the cabin feel less lonely. Ayanna, too, began to see Samuel differently. At first he had seemed awkward, inexperienced, and distant. But now she observed his curiosity, his eagerness to learn, and the genuine respect he showed for her skills. He listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and even tried small experiments in cooking that showed his growing confidence. She realized that her presence was making a difference in his life, just as his willingness to learn was creating a bond between them. This week had started as a simple arrangement of convenience, but it was evolving into something meaningful. One afternoon, after preparing a hearty stew together, they sat by the window watching the prairie. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the golden grass. Samuel took a deep breath, feeling the peace of the moment. "I never realized how much I missed this," he said quietly. "Not just the meals, but the company. I thought I could be content alone, but this week has shown me something I had forgotten." Ayanna nodded, understanding without needing to interrupt. She had seen the change in him, the lightness in his step, the attentiveness in his actions, and the warmth in his eyes. As the days went by, Samuel also began to notice how much he appreciated the little things Ayanna did, how she folded the napkins neatly, arranged the food with care, and smiled softly when he made a small mistake. These gestures, simple as they seemed, carried a meaning he had not expected. They were acts of kindness, patience, and understanding, qualities that were slowly opening his heart. He realized that this week was teaching him more than cooking. It was teaching him how to notice, appreciate, and value the presence of another person. By the fifth day, the bond between them had grown quietly but unmistakably. They worked together seamlessly in the kitchen, sometimes exchanging a glance that spoke more than words. Samuel had learned enough to prepare simple dishes on his own, though he still relied on Ayanna for guidance. They shared meals with a rhythm and comfort that made the cabin feel like a home, not just a place to survive. Samuel began to understand that the essence of companionship was not just being together, but participating in life together, sharing tasks, stories, and experiences. One evening after dinner, they sat outside under the vast prairie sky. The stars were brilliant, scattered across the dark velvet of night. Samuel looked up, feeling small yet connected to something larger than himself. "I never knew that a week could feel like this," he said softly. "I thought time alone was enough, but I see now that it's the people we share it with that make it meaningful." Ayanna smiled, and in that quiet moment they shared an understanding that went beyond words. The week had already transformed the quiet cabin into a place of learning, respect, and gentle companionship. Samuel also began to notice the lessons in patience that went beyond the kitchen. He had always thought that living alone on the prairie made him strong and self-sufficient, but now he realized that strength was not only about independence. It was about being open to help, to guidance, and to the presence of someone who could teach and inspire. Ayanna had shown him that humility was not weakness, but a path to growth. Every meal, every shared story, and every laugh was shaping him in ways he had not anticipated. Ayanna, in turn, felt a sense of fulfillment she had not expected. The week had started as a temporary arrangement, a favor to a lonely cowboy, but it had become a space of connection and mutual learning. She saw Samuel's growth, his increasing confidence, and the genuine gratitude in his eyes. It reminded her why she valued the act of cooking, not just as a skill, but as a way to share life, nurture relationships, and bring joy. She realized that her presence had meaning, that she had brought something valuable into Samuel's life, just as he had brought curiosity, respect, and openness into hers. By the 6th day, Samuel and Ayanna had fallen into a comfortable routine. Mornings began with fresh bread and tea, followed by chores and preparation for lunch. The afternoons were filled with more cooking, storytelling, and laughter. Even simple tasks, like chopping vegetables or stirring a pot, became shared experiences that strengthened their bond. Samuel felt a quiet sense of pride, not just in his growing skills, but in the way he had learned to appreciate effort, care, and the presence of another person. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Samuel reflected on the week. He realized that he had been wrong to believe that life alone was enough. The solitude of the prairie had given him freedom, but it had also kept him from experiencing connection, learning from others, and appreciating the small joys of shared life. Ayanna's presence had opened his eyes, teaching him that companionship, patience, and shared effort were as nourishing as the meals she prepared. As the fire crackled and the night grew deep, Samuel looked at Ayanna with gratitude and respect. He realized that the week had not only changed his daily routine, but had also touched his heart. He understood that the lessons of cooking, patience, and companionship would stay with him long after the week ended. Ayanna had shown him that life could be richer, warmer, and more meaningful when shared with someone willing to teach, guide, and connect. By the end of the day, the prairie outside was quiet, the stars shining like scattered diamonds across the sky. Samuel lay in bed thinking about the meals, the conversations, and the quiet moments of laughter and learning. The week was almost over, but the bond that had formed between them felt enduring. He realized that this simple act, asking someone to cook for him for 1 week, had grown into a story of respect, growth, and friendship. The cabin, once lonely and silent, now carried warmth, life, and the promise of connection. And so, Samuel drifted to sleep with a heart that felt lighter than it had in years. The week had taught him lessons he would never forget. The value of patience, the beauty of learning from another person, and the quiet power of shared meals and companionship. He knew that tomorrow, and the days after, would bring more meals, more stories, and the continued opportunity to understand the meaning of connection, respect, and simple joy. For the first time in a long time, he felt that his life on the prairie could be not just lived, but truly experienced, enriched by the presence of someone who cared enough to teach and share. Word count, approximately 1,305. This part emphasizes their deepening connection, the cowboys' personal growth, and the transformative power of patience, respect, and shared experiences, keeping it clean, engaging, and heartwarming. If you want, I can now expand Part 5, where the week concludes, bringing closure, reflection, and the beginning of a lasting bond. Do you want me to continue with Part 5? 5. Expand, K-row, without heading, 1,300 words, Mayan simple English words. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. And don't use any violated word. Aviat any violated content. Absolutely! Here's Part 5 expanded into a full 1,300-word narrative in simple, engaging English, keeping it clean, heartwarming, and fully immersive. The final morning of the week arrived with the sun rising slowly over the prairie, painting the wide sky with soft shades of orange and gold. Samuel awoke earlier than usual, though it was no longer from nerves or uncertainty. Instead, there was a quiet anticipation in him, a mix of gratitude and reflection. The week with Ayanna had been transformative, and today would be the last day of this shared routine. He lay in bed for a moment, thinking about how much had changed, not just in the cabin or the meals, but in his own heart. He felt lighter, warmer, and more open than he had in years. He dressed quickly and went outside, taking a deep breath of the cool morning air. The prairie stretched endlessly in every direction, and the wind carried the familiar scent of grass and earth. Samuel looked at his cabin, which no longer felt empty. It had been filled with laughter, stories, and the comforting aromas of cooking. He thought about Ayanna's presence, how it had quietly shifted the atmosphere of his home, and, more importantly, the way he saw life itself. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the week they had shared. Ayanna was already moving in the kitchen, preparing the ingredients for their breakfast. Samuel watched her for a moment, noticing the calm focus in her movements. She chopped vegetables with precision, arranged spices carefully, and hummed softly under her breath. It had become such a natural sight that he almost took it for granted. But now, knowing it would be their last day together, he appreciated every detail. He wanted to savor each moment, every small gesture, every shared task that had become a part of his daily life. "Good morning," he said softly, trying not to let the emotion in his voice show too strongly. Ayanna looked up and smiled, her eyes warm yet gentle. "Good morning, Samuel," she replied. "Are you ready for the last day?" he asked, and she nodded. There was no sadness in her expression, only quiet acceptance and the understanding that endings could be as meaningful as beginnings. Breakfast was prepared with care, and they ate together slowly, savoring the flavors and textures. Samuel noticed how different his appreciation for food had become. He had always thought meals were about filling the stomach, but now he understood that meals could carry stories, emotions, and connection. Each bite of bread, each spoonful of soup, and every small flavor was a reminder of the week they had spent together. He glanced at Ayanna, feeling the bond that had grown quietly between them. The week had started as a simple favor, but it had become a lesson in patience, respect, and shared life. After breakfast, they worked together to clean the cabin, wash dishes, and put everything in order. Samuel noticed how naturally they moved around each other, each step almost synchronized. There was a comfort in this routine, a sense of teamwork that made even simple chores enjoyable. He realized that he had learned much more than cooking. He had learned how to cooperate, listen, and value another person's presence. Ayanna's guidance had given him a new perspective on life, one where solitude was not the only way to survive, and connection was not a weakness, but a strength. Later in the morning, Samuel suggested they take a break and step outside. The prairie stretched endlessly, golden in the morning sun, and the wind carried the fresh scent of grass and earth. They walked together in silence for a while, each lost in thought, yet comfortable in each other's company. Samuel felt the weight of the past week, all the lessons, laughter, and shared experiences settling into his mind. He realized that he had grown not just in skill, but in understanding. He was no longer the same lonely cowboy who had nervously asked Ayanna to cook for him. He was a man who had opened his life to learning, connection, and gratitude. As the afternoon approached, Ayanna began preparing the final dinner of the week. Samuel assisted where he could, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, and arranging ingredients, but he also gave her space to work. He had learned the rhythm of the kitchen, and the unspoken understanding between them made the process smooth and natural. The food, like the days before, was rich, comforting, and full of care. But today there was an added weight of significance, a recognition that this was the culmination of their shared week, celebration of learning, connection, and mutual respect. When dinner was finally ready, they set the table by the window, as they had many times before. The golden light of the setting sun filled the room, casting warm hues on the walls and highlighting the small, meaningful touches Ayanna had added to the table. Samuel took a deep breath and tasted the first bite. The flavors were familiar, comforting, and yet somehow more profound than before. He realized that the week had changed not only how he saw food, but how he saw life. Each meal had been an opportunity to connect, to learn, and to experience the simple joy of shared effort. As they ate, they shared stories one last time. Samuel spoke about how much the week had meant to him, how it had taught him to appreciate not only food but the presence of another person. He spoke of his life on the prairie, the solitude he had grown used to, and the lessons he had learned about patience, respect, and care. Ayanna listened, her eyes reflecting understanding and quiet pride. She shared memories of her own experiences, the lessons she had learned from her family, and the satisfaction of seeing someone grow and learn alongside her. Their conversation flowed naturally, filled with warmth, respect, and gentle humor. After dinner, they sat by the fire, the last light of the day fading into the deep blue of night. Samuel felt a mixture of gratitude and melancholy. He knew that Ayanna would leave soon, and with her the week's routine would end. But he also realized that what they had shared would not disappear. The lessons, the stories, the laughter, and the connection would remain with him, shaping the way he viewed life and companionship from now on. He understood that the week had been more than just meals. It had been a journey of growth, understanding, and shared humanity. As the night grew deeper, Samuel finally spoke what he had been feeling all day. "Ayanna," he said quietly, "I want to thank you. This week, it has changed my life more than I could have imagined. Not just the food, but everything. You've taught me patience, care, and the value of sharing life with someone else. I don't want this to end just because the week is over." Ayanna looked at him, her eyes soft but steady. "Samuel, this week was never just about cooking. It was about learning, understanding, and connecting. I'm glad you see that. But life is full of choices. You can take what you've learned and continue to grow, even if I am not here every day." Samuel nodded, understanding the truth in her words. "I will," he said firmly. I've learned so much, and I want to keep these lessons with me. But if you ever wish to return, even for a day or a meal, you will always have a place here." Ayanna smiled, touched by his sincerity. "Thank you, Samuel. That means a great deal." She paused, then added, "And remember, connection is not only about me. It is about being open to others, sharing and caring. You now have the tools to continue this with anyone who crosses your path." As dawn turned to night, Samuel and Ayanna sat quietly together by the fire, letting the unspoken understanding between them settle. They did not need to fill the silence with words. The week had taught them both the power of presence, patience, and shared experience. Samuel felt a quiet pride in himself, knowing he had embraced change, learned from another person, and allowed his heart to open in ways he had thought impossible. Ayanna felt satisfaction knowing that her guidance had been received with respect, attention, and genuine care. When it was finally time for Ayanna to leave, Samuel helped her pack her belongings. He felt a pang of sadness, but also a deep gratitude for the week they had shared. He walked her to the edge of the cabin where her horse was tied. "Thank you," he said once more. "For everything," she nodded, smiling gently. "Remember, Samuel, life is like the meals we shared. Care, patience, and attention make it meaningful. Carry it forward." She mounted her horse and rode away slowly, the dust rising behind her, disappearing into the golden prairie. Samuel stood for a long time, watching the horizon, feeling a mixture of melancholy and hope. He realized that the week had been a gift, not just in terms of meals or company, but in the lessons, the connection, and the subtle transformation it had brought into his life. The cabin was quiet once more, but Samuel knew he was no longer the lonely cowboy who had asked a stranger to cook for him. He was someone who had opened his life to learning, companionship, and growth. That night, Samuel sat by the fire, reflecting on everything that had happened. He thought about the meals they had shared, the stories they had exchanged, and the quiet moments of laughter and understanding. He felt a deep sense of gratitude and peace. The week had shown him that life was richer when shared, that learning from another person could be transformative, and that even simple acts, like cooking together, could carry profound meaning. He knew that from this moment forward, he would carry these lessons into every day, every meal, and every encounter. And so, as the prairie stretched endlessly under the stars, Samuel felt a warmth in his heart that had nothing to do with the fire in the cabin. The week had ended, but the impact would last a lifetime. He had learned patience, respect, and the quiet joy of shared life. He had learned to see another person's presence as a gift, to value connection, and to embrace the small, meaningful moments that make life worth living. The lonely cowboy was no longer lonely. He had learned the true meaning of companionship, gratitude, and the lasting power of human connection.